Support for the show comes from Carolina Forward, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to building a more equitable, democratic, and prosperous North Carolina.
You can learn more about their vision and values at carolinaforward.org.
North Carolina State Highway Patrol.
What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor?
A contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
Rock and roll has got to go.
And welcome back to the Hometown Holler. I'm Daniel Ayers.
And I'm Quinn Ray. Well, hey, man.
Hello. I never know what to say, to be honest. It's not that I dislike our interest. I never know how to respond to it.
I like the hey, man, and the hello.
Clearly the listeners do too.
It's becoming our thing.
It's a me thing where and especially like when I'm mid sip, because I always take a sip to like hydrate my vocalizer when we start an episode, and it's always like, "Hey man," and I'm like, "Oh hey,
I need to wet my whistle."
Exactly. But this is gonna be a fun episode because I just like for so many guests. We have on not just really cool, impressive people, but people that I've never met, and so I'm it's always that kind of nervous tension when you're meeting somebody you've never met. But today we get to kick it with KP.
That's right. Hey. That's right. I'm really excited about this because, as you mentioned, we do have guests we don't know, and so there's a little different level of stuff. But it is really cool that we're doing this podcast, and our friends support it. So. And we get to interview and talk with one of my best good friends. So without further ado, we have Kristen Powers today in the studio. Kristen serves as the executive director of Benevolence Farm, a groundbreaking initiative offering a new beginning to women transitioning from incarceration. But her journey of advocacy began long before her role at Benevolence. A true champion of change, Kristen was recognized as a White House champion of change during her high school years, and she was even offered the prestigious Morehead Cain Scholarship, the most prestigious scholarship in North Carolina, and yet she chose to go a different path, opting for Stanford University, where she graduated in 2016. But returning to her roots in North Carolina, Kristen has committed herself to tackling the systematic issues facing our community. Working closely with trailblazers like Anita Earls, she had honed her skills as the advocacy coordinator at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. Kristen's influence echoes far and wide, resonating through her advocacy of the establishment of the public defender system in Alamance County to the unyielding dedication to reforming the bail system here. Kristen's spirit is resilient and full of determination, embodying what truly means to be a badass in the relentless pursuit of social change. Mind you, Kristen, when I was trying to figure out how to write this bio, one of the things that came to me was, we are friends. I know quite a bit about you, but you can honestly say Google me, and there is so much shit about you, and it is
good
awesome.
Stuff. Yeah.
And she is one of the most humble people that I know. Even on her LinkedIn, she goes, "I'm just another one trying to help the Southern change." She doesn't give herself flowers. Kristen, thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for being a badass. And I learned a whole lot about you just trying to Google you.
Thank you. I hope it wasn't too confusing because there's a Kristen Powers Fox News correspondent as well.
Wait, that wasn't you?
Same, blonde color,
Exactly.
But that's pretty much where similarities end.
I almost tweaked just to kind of fuck around a little bit with Quinn mainly. Tweak the intro to be like, Kristen was an intern for the Tucker Carlson Network and spent years interning with the Fraternal Brotherhood of Sheriffs. I don't know, man.
I was a Republican growing up, so you wouldn't be too far off. But I cut it out before. I was
a libertarian. I think like this is North Carolina. It's everybody at some point is everything.
So let's just kind of get right into it. Well, I mentioned earlier you are the executive director of Benevolence Farms, and I think for some of our Alamance listeners, they might be aware of what Benevolence Farm is, but for our across the state listeners and even a lot of our Alamance listeners, can you just give a rundown of what the farm is?
Sure. So the already needing to cut that out. Words today. I think that was the first conversation I've had all day. Okay.
And wow, that's saying, because folks, it is 1 p.m. So we're not cutting this at like 7 in the morning. Like we've been up for a while.
I live by myself. Other roommates were asleep. Anyway, okay. The short version of what Benevolence Farm is a nonprofit social enterprise that works alongside formerly incarcerated women, mostly, and gender expansive people to provide housing, employment, and community for folks across rural North Carolina. So that's the short pitch. Longer version is that looks many different forms, whether it's our actual farm in Graham that provides direct housing and employment to women coming home after incarceration, all the way to our advocacy efforts, to our bail fund. We are trying all these innovative different approaches because we know reentry isn't working for folks, and we're trying to figure out what will.
So the Benevolence isn't like a halfway house or a group home.
No, we are fully independent. We, I think most people think, we get called a halfway house sometime, but halfway houses are technically contracted with the state as an extension of somebody's confinement. So they're still semi-incarcerated when they're in a halfway house, have to often follow very rigid rules, usually not very trauma-informed.
So technically still under sentence.
Still under sentence and can go back. And all of our folks are exiting on conditions of community supervision, which hence the name is in community, and we don't touch that. That's separate. That's their own experience with often probation or parole. But yeah, we are an independent 501c3.
And you founded Benevolence Farms?
I did not.
Okay. You started as a board member, right?
I started as a volunteer.
Okay.
So Benevolence Farm has a long history prior to me coming in. It was actually founded in 2007 by Tanya Gisa, who is a social worker working with people affected by incarceration, and kept hearing that women were disproportionately affected more and more. Since basically the inception of the war on drugs, women's rate of incarceration has increased 700% across the country, but there has definitely not been a 700% increase in women's reentry programming that's trauma-informed and responsive to their needs. And so she started interviewing people to say, what do you need coming home? And housing and employment came up. But it took her another 7 years to even get the property that we now call Benevolence Farm in southern Alamance County, and another 2 years before we actually welcomed home our first person in 2016. So I came on as a volunteer in 2017 on the fundraising committee, and then board, and then staff. So it's been about 7 years of some form of involvement.
Could you tell us, what does trauma-informed mean?
Trauma-informed is understanding what has happened to people and tailoring your services and responses and in your relationship to that reality someone has faced. And so it has to be customized and individualized to work. But for example, a short version of it might be is like we're in an enclosed space and my back is kind of to the door. Some of our folks would ask as a trauma-informed response to actually face the door because, and this is common with veterans, for example, like your back should never be exposed. So there's that. There's being mindful of slamming doors, because like slamming doors mirrors incarceration with the slamming of the prison gate. So those are kind of small examples of really just trying to get to know the person, what has happened to them, and how we can be in relationship with them in a healthy way.
That's amazing. And I'm just thinking of all the research and training one would have to do to really serve folks with those needs, because these are things that to me are not intuitive. As somebody who's never been incarcerated, I have no qualms about sitting with my back to the door and the close of the door. I don't associate it with trauma. So was it difficult, or what is, I guess, better question, what was the process like for training to be trauma informed?
Yeah, so I think actually anyone can be trauma informed if they're coming into things with curiosity, coming into relationships with curiosity, because I am not a social worker. I'm not an attorney. I've not had like a formal degree to go with this work, but a lot of it is just learned from conversation. I know we had this service provider once who wanted to do budgeting with our folks, but she kept telling them, you have to kick the cigarette habit because you're spending X amount of money on cigarettes. And if she had kind of talked like, oh, I see cigarettes on this line item. Tell me more about this. That
An inquisitive conversation, a dialogue, essentially.
She would have learned, like, this person's used opioids every day for 16 years, and her time at Benevolence is the first time she hasn't. And her harm reduction approach, meaning that the thing she's doing to reduce the likelihood that she uses opioids again is to smoke cigarettes as a step down.
And that's a win.
and that's a win.
Yeah, it's a big win.
And so it's not something to be stigmatized in that
Right.
budgeting process. So it can be challenging to find other partners sometimes because of this approach we take. And I think it's gaining steam, this trauma-informed approach, but it certainly is slow going, and it has to be intentional and only can scale at the speed of trust.
So what got you into this work? How did this all come about? Because you went to Stanford, or you graduated from Chapel Hill High School, then you went to Stanford. Did you go to Stanford knowing you wanted to come back and do this type of stuff?
No, and it actually kind of goes back a little bit further, because growing up, my mom had Huntington's disease, which is a neurodegenerative brain disease. We actually didn't know she had it because we don't know my biological grandfather. And so none of the grandparents I grew up with had it. And it was a bit of a surprise. But she started to look and act different. It used to be called Huntington's chorea because they're these dance-like movements. They've since changed it to recognize the challenging brain functions that come with it, like behavioral change, depression, psychosis. Like there's a mix of all these symptoms. So basically she looked like she was drunk and also had like symptoms you couldn't see. And that meant she got policed by our neighbors a lot. I remember being in an apartment complex where the police would knock on our door because someone had accused her of being drunk with her kids, instead of someone asking like, hey, it seems like you're maybe struggling today. Can I help you? And I, even as like an 8-year-old, my friends would come up and say, your mom's drunk. And I was like, she is a Southern Baptist teetotaler. I've literally never seen her consume alcohol. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm 8. I don't really even know what, like, you have to be getting that, in retrospect from your parents.
Yeah.
And she was a white British woman. So like she thankfully never got into the system. But it certainly had an effect on our family, even when she would act out. And my dad, out of fear, would, who was a former police officer, would call the police to get ahead of someone calling the police on them in a moment of crisis, because he didn't know who else to call to help de-escalate the situation without also ending it, both parents in jail or getting arrested. So that kind of stuck with me over the years. My mom, unfortunately, Huntington's is not curable, so she got really sick and ended up passing away. And my dad essentially raised us. And I was just like very into animals. I was raised in an animal welfare family, through animal shelters and petfinder.com. And
I got a factoid about Kristen talking about animals. Her dad is on the credits for Hocus Pocus.
Yes, and he was in the room when Puppy Bowl was ideated.
Really?
Before the Super Bowl.
Now that's the fact that I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Puppy Bowl's great.
Yes, he was in that brainstorm session. So animals went to like my love of wildlife, which climate change, I was like, oh my gosh, my favorite wildlife's going to disappear because of climate change. And then I got really involved in climate change, and people thought, like the advocacy side of it, people thought going to Stanford, I'd study environmental science. But while I was there, I think I started to reckon, as one of the few Southerners out in California, what my position as a white woman from the South was. And also just hearing the judgment people had about the South in a quote unquote liberal area, where most of the students are from California. And then Michael Brown was murdered in 2014. And that really threw me into the deep end of like, what's my positionality and where am I going to go, and what am I going to do coming back home? So it kind of led to 2 years of reflection and having family who were police officers and just trying to figure out what I could do or what I should do. And that led me to coming back home after graduation, because I also didn't want to be a part of the Southern brain drain, which happens to most people who go to Stanford. They stay in San Francisco or New York or Seattle. And when you saw the map of where alumni were going after graduation, it was me and 2 other people going back to the South, and they were going back, one to play in the LPGA and then the other going to Duke Medical School. So it's pretty rare. I actually wrote an article in our school newspaper about it because people were so confused.
Of course you did. Of course you
I
did.
was like, I figure write a newspaper article instead of explaining 4 million times why I'm returning to the South. I
mean, you did a documentary called Twitch on Huntington's disease and your experience going through to get tested. So I guess after you did that, you just settled with writing articles to explain things to folks, huh?
Yeah, documentary making was I like the experience, and I have so much respect for anyone who makes videos. Like even y'all making your content, I've told Quinn it makes me tired.
This
Thank you.
documentary that we speak of, and we'll move past this real quick, but this isn't some 4-minute YouTube documentary.
Oh, no.
This is
It's a feature.
Yes, absolutely. By the way, Ricky Hurtado has not watched it, and he's one of our best good friends.
Known him 7 years.
Man, so I didn't know if we were gonna say that, but we are officially that's going out. Ricky, you've been called out.
Starting our own beef.
Oh,
holler.
sweet, dude, a beef just started on the holler. Yes. Oh man.
So one more question about the farm. Can you just kind of shed light on some success stories, how it works for people, and how you've seen it benefit and change people's lives?
Yeah, so I think at Benevolence Farm, for each person coming to the farm, they're coming for their own reasons. But we have some like very visible success stories. I mean, y'all have met Mona. She's my coworker who's formerly incarcerated mom, and she's just like crushing the community building game with other formerly incarcerated women and organizing around the issues that affect formerly incarcerated mothers. We're obviously recording the day before Mother's Day, and it's a very complicated holiday for our folks. But then there are also behind the scenes wins that you're never going to be a part of. We actually put them in our newsletter because it was getting hard to convey how like even things like getting your birth certificate after prison is huge, or talking to a family member on the phone for more than 15 minutes without the phone timing you out in the prison system. And so I think even years later, seeing people leave and text us like, I just had a baby, here are the baby shoot photos, or one of our alumna just bought a house in Mebane. So that was really exciting.
Holy crap.
Starting businesses. Yeah, it's really neat to see where they go with their journeys. And even if things don't happen the way they thought or the way we thought, like I think to provide a space where you don't have to worry about where you're sleeping at night or where you're eating, like to have the opportunity to heal with all your needs met is a pretty unique opportunity, unfortunately, for many of the people that we serve.
Is there any weight involved when one of your residents decides to, buy a house or get a job, and they say, I'm at Benevolence Farms right now? Does that carry any weight? Does that help them on a resume builder sense?
We do have some partners that recognize that if someone's in a reentry program, it does add weight. I think the place where it adds the biggest weight is with probation officers, because I think the probation officers like having a consistency of knowing where someone is, and then if they can't be contacted, there's multiple other people they can contact. Often many of the people they're supervising live in the same building, so it's very efficient for them. And we do see, I think, the probation officers being a bit more lenient with our folks because they know the support that we provide. And probation is often not talked about in the lens of incarceration, but it is often the reason people are going back to prison or jail, especially for women. 15% of our folks have returned to jail or prison. As far as we can tell, of the folks we are able to track, none of them have returned on what's called like a new crime. They're returning on a probation violation. So we've had folks return for failure to have an address because they were without a home. We had someone go back for 90 days because she tested positive for marijuana in a drug test.
Oh man.
So most of the time it's not things threatening people's safety. And we support people of all conviction types, which makes us unique as well, like Class A to the minimum class that can get you incarcerated in a prison. And so we're often seeing, though, I think the impact on the drug war, or that the drug war has had, is really wrecking people's chances of reentry, particularly when it comes to women in the rural parts, especially here in North Carolina. One
of the things that, as I've gotten to know you and kind of spent some time thinking about your job, in a technical sense, I guess you clock out, but it doesn't ever feel like you really can clock out when you're involved in work that is so emotionally and intense, and you're really dealing with people's lives, right? Helping people return to a state of equilibrium or well-being, or maybe not even return, but discover it if they've never even had stability in their life before. And I guess I'm curious, how do you, I would imagine there's a high burnout rate. I haven't seen the statistics, but I would not be surprised to learn that lots of people, spend 5-10 years in this kind of work and then aren't able to sustain it emotionally because it's so involved. How do you keep this sustainable for you?
It's certainly ebbed and flowed over the years. When I started, it was myself and one other full-time staff member. We are in a much healthier place now, where we are able to sustain 4 staff right now who are mostly formerly incarcerated or have had an experience with the criminal legal system of some sort. So I think for me, the sustaining is in part like having this community around me. It's not just me, but it's also just like each of us. I think it's just hard to convey like how our team steps up to support one another. Mm-hmm. Like last year, when my dog passed away, like my staff was like, "You don't come to the farm." They like would not let me. Mm-hmm. They were like, "You stay home, or you do what you need to do." Or they even got me a little like crochet replica of him that I put on my desk at home. Even the women who are part of the farm step up, and that they can like tell. They're like, "You're having a bad day. Like, do you want to tell me what's happening?" And we have to obviously maintain some types of boundaries, but
you're not going through this alone.
We're not going through it alone. And I think the other component that makes us unique from maybe an average social service provider is that we are tired of hitting our head against the same problems over and over. So we're intentional about advocating for systemic change. So we're going to Raleigh, we're going to the General Assembly, we're going to the local commissioners, we're going to whoever has power of some sort over the systems that can cause us harm, and pushing for systemic change that way. So we're not just receiving the problems that happen to us. We're trying to, both from a staff and resident perspective, take back that power to support our folks.
I want to move on to another question, but before this, I don't think Kristen is conveying actually how much work she does in this. I texted last night, what are you getting into? It's a Friday night, and she's, I'm sitting at the jail. I'm trying to get somebody out. I'll probably be here all night. And so, that's when, the group chat started going off like, well, do you need food? Can we help you here? And do things like that. And then the other day she was in Elon, then she had to be in Durham, and then she had to come back to Winston-Salem, all in a day. So I don't know how you do it. I've been watching you closely as a friend, and like you really put in some work that it would burn me out. So I don't think it's for everybody, but for some reason you make it look easy, and I'm glad to hear that you have a support system at Benevolence as well that's helping you out. But you kind of talked about safety a little bit, so that kind of transitioned us into what does a safe community look like to you, and how does it kind of coincide with kind of Benevolence work, or does it?
I think it does, because I think what we're proving at Benevolence Farm is that when someone's basic needs are met and they're within a healthy, non-judgmental community, you don't need police presence or prisons. Like, we are able to address harm amongst ourselves and have some dignity and autonomy over how we hold one another accountable. So I think one of the core experiences of being human is the ability to cause harm and be harmed. We cannot go through life without those two experiences. But for whatever reason, and particularly I think in the last 30 to 50 years, we seem to want to bring in an outside party to address harm, when in fact a lot of these, I would challenge us to even think like, is someone playing music too loud or parking in a weird way even harm? Or kids playing in your front yard, or things where people are quick to call the police, could actually also be addressed by having conversation in relationship before something hits a crisis point. But I think for some place like in Alamance County, the fact that people are struggling to maintain housing or to stay fed and keep their family fed, or even just earn a living wage, make it so that people are constantly in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, it makes it really hard to self-actualize. I mean, many of us learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or there's Kaufman's sailboat of needs is another model we use, where if you're like constantly plugging holes in a sinking ship, like you're not thinking about which direction you're going or what's next. It's always in the moment, and that can cause people to make decisions they may not have otherwise made if they were like the three of us, able to stop and think and pause and make intentional decisions.
Trust in the stability of their circumstances.
He's definitely
Yeah.
brushing my shoulders a little bit on that one. Yeah.
Well, and even just having a community, like we see, so many of our folks have just been like so alone in this experience, and when they sought help, they've been turned away. We haven't published it yet, but we had one resident write a piece about how she was without a home, and she had a conviction that required her to maintain an address, but she also can't access, with that same conviction, she can't access a homeless shelter. And so she was in the office of the probation like every week saying like, I'm still trying to figure it out, but like, because I don't have a home, I lost my ID, I don't know where it is, and I can't get a job, and I don't have money to get to the DMV, and like, I'm walking here, and like, what can you help me? And then she ended up going back to prison for failure to have an address. And then we fought for like 9 months to get her out of that mess. She was like, not really her. I mean, she was trying what she knew to do.
Sure.
And most of our folks also have pretty extreme disabilities too, both like cognitive, mental health, neurodivergent, physical. And so they don't have all the tools at their disposal, and they're often without the community that most of us have to overcome some of those barriers.
One thing we've talked about that I find really fascinating is the folks you serve, are diverse in many, many senses of the term, but one of the senses in which they're diverse is political diversity. Could you talk a little bit about how some folks view the political system, the political process? Obviously, many folks are disenchanted with the system, but could you kind of shed light on how the folks you serve think of and discuss politics?
Yeah, so I feel like someone could probably do a PhD
absolutely.
on like the radicalization, more to the right, I would say, of folks who've been in prison, because they're directly disgruntled with the experience of government, whether it's federal government incarcerating them or state government or local. And so their trust is worn down already. And I think we've seen like nationally where distrust or what distrust can lead to. But we have folks who, I have one resident who, she's like, if I ever get knocked out, don't ask me who the president is, because I don't know who it was since the first George Bush.
Wow.
And
she was being serious.
She was very serious. She was like, we need to come up with another question because
Wow.
I can't name them. And that being said, that person was at Second Chance Lobby Day last week, like
Rock and roll.
cheering her, raising her like super tatted, like hands like up in the air and just celebrating. And like, how do I get, like, she's speaking on a so
super cool.
getting involved.
Yeah.
But we have folks who, sometimes when we're working, we have a social enterprise where we make body care and candles that fund the employment side of our program. And
The candles are awesome, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, smell real good.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And some interesting topics come up in the workshop while pouring those candles. So people have brought up and sometimes just the most like unexpected, like out of left field comments where someone might say like, oh, I just hate Governor Roy Cooper. And we have to run attention to as a nonprofit, like how much can we talk about this?
Sure.
Usually it's more, again, the curiosity. Oh, like, do you want to talk about that? Or like, what's leading you to say that? Right now, our folks actually are really interested in Donald Trump because
Is it because he's on the stand?
is criminally involved in like they see him in experiences they resonate
I was going to
with.
ask if there's a sense of like connecting with him because, I mean, his whole narrative right now, if you look at his interviews to social media, every chance he gets to speak publicly, he is
the victim.
He's the victim, right? And I think he's communicating directly to folks who have been the victim and who know what it's like to be the target of the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there is, even though that's a complicated experience, we see like what we're also trying to do and why, like we are statewide and also we're in very close relationship with the people we serve because we see how the local level, like if they see someone showing up for them, I think they're immediately that person's like biggest fan.
Right.
So if they see someone passing legislation, like we were in for Second Chance Lobby Day, it's a huge day, one of our favorite days. We go to Raleigh and we talk to legislators about the issues affecting formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated people. And like one of our residents was just like talking to Representative Marcia Morey, who's known for extensive criminal legal advocacy, and Representative Morey was just like, here's what we're doing, here's what we're done, here's how you can help. Like, and they came back being like, we gotta make friends with this person because like she's trying something and we appreciate that. So I think that is exciting. And I think when we're always kind of get chagrined at the statement of like a voice for the voiceless, or like I'm speaking for people, like formerly incarcerated people and currently incarcerated people don't need anyone speaking for them. Like we just need to hand them the microphone.
Right.
So maybe the next guest from Benevolence should be like someone like Mona, who's, formerly incarcerated. But like, I think that the experience of watching them build power is really cool. Like we actually were successful last week in emailing one of our representatives to become the first Republican co-sponsor on a bill that would waive, it's very technical, but like one of the big things for them is waiving the fee required that you have to pay if you are mandated by the court to do community service hours, which is prohibitive.
That's wild that
for
you
a
have
lot
to
of
pay.
folks. Like $250.
Just to do community service?
Yeah.
What?
Which is required by the court.
That's super cool. Can we give a shout out to that co-sponsor? Are we at liberty to?
Representative Rydell,
Thank
who
you.
represents
That's us.
Benevolence Farm,
Yeah.
our district and our
Oh,
rep.
cool. So Dennis is helping you guys get that to hopefully through.
Yeah, Rydell has been one of the like better listeners, I think, that we've had the experience with
cool.
in General Assembly, of definitely not always agreeing with
Yeah.
us, but being responsive by email.
But you feel that there's a good dialogue there?
I think so, yeah. And sometimes we obviously push back, but I think like he
But that's just
expects
politics.
that. Yeah.
Well,
so,
that's really cool. Honestly, I'm really encouraged to hear that.
yeah.
That makes
So
me
we
happy.
go back and forth, and then there's local issues too that we want to advocate for. So we're not only doing this in Alamance County, but like people go home to Surrey County, Gaston County, Edgecombe. Like we are trying to empower, or like I said, they already have the power, but we're trying to give folks the tools and know-how. And sometimes it literally is just going to Second Chance Lobby Day and knowing that every person on that stage has been formerly incarcerated, to like really bust some myths on like in the stigmas that affect people, and they're ready to go at that point.
Well, I think we're coming up on some time here, but I want to leave with one last question. So if we're looking into the future, what do you envision as one of our greatest opportunities or a priority that we should put forward for advancing social justice and creating safer communities?
Yeah, so I'll do this in the frame of the organization, because at Benevolence Farm, we've talked about we really want to be a place for people coming out who truly have no options, who don't have family or have lost connection to their family, like really don't have anywhere to go or live or couldn't do it on their own. Some of our folks like with more severe disabilities. But we see so many people who come to us because of housing issues or because of the inability to get job or essential IDs for the reentry experience. And so it's kind of like a carte blanche approach, but like I would love us to continue to see these changes that remove these unnecessary barriers for reentering communities. That it's not only going to support this community, but like ensuring ID access for everyone is going to have ripple effects. Ensuring housing for all is going to have ripple effects. Ensuring that we challenge our assumptions about safety and harm is going to have ripple effects for all of us. So if we're supporting people that have been pushed most to the margins, it's going to uplift the rest of us at the same time. But we should let the people with those experiences lead the way.
Socialism.
How do people like Daniel and I, how do we support people that need our help?
Well, speak for yourself. I don't want to support. No, I'm just kidding. No. That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, so for Benevolence Farm, my staff joke that I find something to do for anyone. Like if you show up and have time and energy, I will find something for you. I mean, we run a garden so you can weed, or you can host a fundraising party. But I think the challenge I have to folks is as they're going about their day, challenge themselves to build relationship with people. Like, do you know who your neighbors are? If something happened in your neighborhood, instead of jumping to next door and making accusations, like could you have that relationship already and being like, hey man, like this is happening in the community. Some folks are concerned. Like, could you maybe turn your music down or what? Like, even
but you're
just
asking a lot for an introvert, right?
Well,
like,
no, I mean,
that...
I think this is actually what you're saying is really interesting to me, because I think, you open with kind of a description of what you do, and I think what it comes down to is like you facilitate the process of humanizing people, right? And I feel like that's what you're encouraging folks to do, is look at other people as humans.
Yeah, but I mean, if my neighbor's playing music really loud, I don't want to. People, I think human nature doesn't like confrontation, right? And even if it's small as it is, I'm not going to go. I would. Let's just hypothetical speaking. I would go knock on the door. But what if there is an introvert who really doesn't like confrontation, who's not going to go knock on the door, and it's just easier to call the police?
Well, I would ask, do you even need to call the police?
Yeah.
I mean, so this, we're going outside of Alamance County for a second. I did live in Durham for a year, and it was in the West End, which was part of a huge gentrification. Like literally one side of our street was like young white folks moving in, and the other side was black folks who'd been there forever. And it was shocking what people were calling the police for without even knowing their neighbor's name. Like even my roommate,
The young white folks specifically.
Yeah.
Or everybody.
No,
Okay.
I mean, like even my roommate, like saw a car that he thought was too close to the corner. And he's like, generally an ally, like someone we might be surprised who would do this. And he was like, I need to call the police to move this car. And I was like, you could literally just put a note that like you're concerned this car is too close to like you're concerned for safety. Like someone's going to hit your car coming. Like just leave a note. Why do you need to call the police? Or even, I am an introvert, hardcore. But I think it's also embedded in my values to like try to be a good neighbor. And my dad was very much into encouraging us to be a good member of our community, wherever we choose that to be. And even I think about how my neighbor had 6 dogs, and maybe too many. And again, I'm coming from an animal welfare family. I know it's probably not the right amount of dogs, but like walking by, I'd be like, hey, I'm Kristen, I live across the street. And he'd be like, hey, I'm Courtney. And over time, we would just keep saying hi. I'm like, oh, who's this dog? Like, we all, and even introverts will go up to a dog who love dogs and be like, oh my God, tell me about your dog. So over time, like we just build this like quick, like, hey, oh, like how's Stella? Stella's cute. Oh, Stella just had puppies. Tell me about the puppies. And it even evolved to like sometimes we'd walk down the street with like because I was like, your dogs need some exercise, like low key. You just told me that like they are really hyper. I'm like, maybe some exercise could work. But like 3 weeks later, I saw Courtney on the front step, and he said he was crying, like trying not to, but like crying. And his neighbor who had just moved into one of those big new Durham builds where they like are absurd for the community they're in. This woman my age had moved in and could see like into his backyard and saw how many dogs he had and called animal control with that, who did not like work with him.
No effort to connect and
see how we can support. They took all his dogs.
Oh man.
And he was like, those were my babies. Yeah. Like, I don't even know this woman who just called the police on me. And at that point I was like, again, as white people, we have to be very careful not to do the saviorship thing. And so like, I was like, what do you need in this moment? Yeah. And he was like, I just need to process this. Like he didn't want me to go confront anyone. I wasn't going to take that upon myself, but I think
you would have, if he'd asked, you would have been,
if he like, I think it's just, I think we need to have all the answers and solutions coming into building safety and community. But I think often it's just not making these assumptions. And I keep saying curiosity and questioning. Right. But I really do think that is the first step to practice. And even when like people listening may hear me say currently or formerly incarcerated instead of words like inmate or felon, even just the act of saying, well, I wonder why. And then you and I could talk about like why that's restoring the dignity and humanity to people who've been a number in the system for so long. So it's not to say you do this instantly or overnight, but I think it's a practice over time of saying like, is this actually making us safer as a community? What could make us safer instead? And having these conversations too, because I feel this way in Alamance County. Like obviously we have a group chat where we process this, and I have friends who I process this with, but I don't think enough of us in Alamance are talking. Honestly, a lot of my conversations where I'm seeing this happening are outside of Alamance County. And so I think we can at the very least start there with those conversations. Well,
I hate to cut you off. We can continue some more of this on
the back porch will be kicking.
But where can people find more about you and Benevolence?
So Benevolence Farm, I know it can be hard to spell for people, but hopefully the hauler will put the links up to Instagram. We have a baby TikTok. We're trying to build that out. And then we do have a pretty good newsletter, if I do say so myself. So subscribe to our newsletter. And at this point, as a comms major, I do write pretty much all that content. So you can find us there.
KP, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.